So, hey guys, welcome to a special edition of On Offense with Chris Goldsmith. I am here with Reed Galen of the Home Front, and we're doing this for the first time as a live collaboration. So, if there are technical difficulties, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. We're both new at this, and I'm at the point where I'm like going to need reading glasses. So, I'm
Here,
reaching the point where I'm falling behind the times.
I got two pair. I got them
There
everywhere.
we go.
And anybody watching who
So,
knows that you have them everywhere in your house.
yep, yep. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Goldsmith. I am the founder of Task Force Butler and Veterans Fighting Fascism. We are nonprofits that train veterans to conduct open source intelligence research into domestic extremists so we can hold them accountable in a court of law. This is the type of research that people did to hold the January 6th insurrectionists accountable before Donald Trump decided to give them all pardons. We also, with Veterans Fighting Fascism, are engaged in a public education campaign, not just to raise awareness about authoritarianism and fascism and what these things look like, but to help you learn how to fight back. And that is why my personal brand outside of the nonprofits is called On Offense, because if your only strategy is to play defense, whether you're playing chess, or fighting war, you're going to lose when the other side is single. So with that, I'll kick it over for his info.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn. Hey, Chris.
Yep,
All right.
I hear
So
you.
everybody, hey, for those of you that don't know me, Chris, first and foremost, thanks for having me. My name is Reed Galen. Many of you probably know me from a past life when I was co-founder of the Lincoln Project. And so now I am president of jointheunion.us, which think of it like a civilian version of what Chris does, which is community building, trying to figure out how to get folks involved that feel like they have either been left out or left behind or disillusioned with the American political system. And I hope you guys will go to jointheunion.us. But, Chris, you and I, the first time I ever saw you actually was in a movie called War Game, and a friend of mine had produced it. And I live here in Park City, Utah. And so at Sundance, it was, I think, the last day. And it can correct me on the details here, Chris, but the idea was that it was a lot of former elected officials and people, what was going to happen if there was another sort of Donald Trump type election a la
Hmm.
2022, but it wasn't just January 6th. There was a much broader, uglier sort of militia based thing. And you played the bad guy, right? You played the bad guy.
That's right.
And at the end of the movie, right, you played what they call the red team, right, in these sort of simulations. And at the end of the movie, everybody's sort of going around and there's this sort of self-congratulatory feeling that the cameras pick up. And you're just sort of sitting there and you have this like, I don't know if it's a wry look on your face or a little bit of disbelief, but you're sort of like, you guys still don't get it. You
Yeah.
still don't get what's going on. And I feel like, Chris, there's still a little bit of that that's going on today, which is, so much of what we've dealt with is a lack of imagination, right?
Hmm.
And I think we're still dealing with that. But like, do you feel that that's a little bit? Do you feel like you're still sitting at the end of that table with a lot of self-satisfied people going, "Oh, we know how this is going to work out"?
Yeah, yeah. I think that there were many reasons that I was not involved in the promotion of that movie. I found the entire exercise, the conclusion of the exercise, and certainly the movie to be this kind of Democratic Party hubris,
Mm,
where and it was endemic to the Democratic Party, which I support
right,
under Joe Biden, in that everything is going to return to normal as long as we just stick to the rules and norms, as long as
right.
we respect our adversaries instead of treat them like enemies. But that ship sailed, uh, if not before January 6th, certainly on January 6th. At no point did the Democratic Party actually treat Donald Trump and his insurrectionist movement as the fascists, as the insurrectionists, as the danger to our democracy that they were telling us that they were. And what made me so upset in the specifics of that movie and the way that the self-congratulatory backslapping that was going on at the end, was that I knew that these were the people who were in a position to actually save the day. And their takeaway from that exercise was, don't worry, the systems will hold. Well,
Mhm.
it's been just a couple months now. How's that working out for you guys? It's not fucking working out. So, it is telling people I told you so
Right.
when it comes to the rise of fascism doesn't fucking feel good, man. Like,
Yeah.
like it sucks. It sucks.
Well, and unfortunately, regardless of who you're talking to or what the context is, as you know, telling someone "I told you so" not often a great way to start a conversation, anyway. But
Hmm.
I will say this: I've talked to a bunch of friends of mine. Well, I'm sure we are all, the two of us are on the phone with different people all day, every day. And one person, actually, a couple of people just yesterday, um they had done a lot of research. They were very invested in understanding the contours, the development of something like a project 2025, right? And they
Hmm.
felt like they really knew what was going on. But then what they said was, one, they didn't count on deporting people, sans habeas corpus or anything, to third party countries, to
Hmm.
gulags, and then threatening to do it to American citizens. And then the second thing was, as of yesterday afternoon, the president signing an executive order going after a specific political party's ability to raise money, right? In his opponent. And they're like, we didn't count on that.
Yep.
And that's one thing, people are
Hmm.
like, well, aren't you so upset? It's like, it's not that I'm not upset, Chris, is that I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been focused on since November is helping people receive training on becoming a real anti-fascist, in a way that does not require me or my organizations to lead. Like most nonprofits, because every nonprofit is a business, right? Just the word nonprofit is misleading. Every nonprofit, if it is to continue to exist, needs to be a viable business.
Right.
I have a habit of not looking out for my self interests and giving away too much for free. But in this moment, I have to do that. So rather than create some sort of proprietary training program that give, give people access, I am taking all of my knowledge and skill set that I can use it for their own means. And when it comes to things like attacks on Act Blue, like, yeah, we should have expected that to happen. I certainly did. I
Right.
mean, I did. They were talking about it for years leading up to this point. Why wouldn't we expect them to do it? So the answer to that is people organizing at the hyper local level. Fascism is not just a top down problem. It is a it's on your lawn problem. It's growing in your backyard problem. So in
Right.
order to fight fascism, you can't be concerned just with the White House. Like if you're watching CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, it's like the White House is running the country, but the people who run the country are actually like they live in the same town as you. And if
Right.
you're not active in fighting fascism in your hometown, at the school board, at the county commissioners level, at the your state assemblies, you are not protecting yourself, you are not protecting your family or your neighbors. So if people want to learn how to become an anti-fascist, go to veteransfightingfascism.org and download our instruction manuals for creating an anti-fascist book club. These hyper local cells, that is the answer to fighting back when the infrastructure, like Act Blue, is being attacked and dismantled.
So let me ask you this, both from your time in the military and since you left the military and now you've taken this new role on with Task Force Butler, and we're 100% in agreement with you and in alignment with you at the union as far as the hyper local piece is concerned. How do you both build, achieve, and sustain that? I'm going to use a military term here, Chris. That small unit cohesion you talk about. How do you keep people engaged? How do you keep people together? How do you keep them moving forward? To your point, like, yes, the aggregate number of people watching MSNBC and CNN at any given time is probably one third the number of someone of people watching, like a strongest man competition from 1984, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like they have an outsized influence on what's being said and what's being communicated. So to your earlier point, how do you keep people engaged? How do you keep them involved when so much of what we see could be bad news, could be depressing, could be demoralizing?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So when I say book club, a lot of people will kind of like roll their eyes and be like, "What? Why am I gonna?
Right,
How is reading books gonna save America?" The point of the book club is to facilitate the recreation of a third space. When I was growing up, I was born in 1985. When I was growing up, we as kids used to go to the bowling alley. We used to go to the skate rink. um, there were playgrounds that like there were third places
right,
for kids. The adults, had VFW and Legion halls for men who are veterans. Those were friendly places. There used to be places in town that in a better economy, people had time to socialize. But fast forward to 2025, after and during the pandemic, that really caused people to just get in the habit of being separated and isolated.
right,
We don't have those places where people are interacting and building relationships. So, what
right,
the core of the book club is to get people out of their house, out from behind these screens, and to sit down, whether it's in a coffee shop or a local bar or your local library, getting into these physical places with people so that you all you have is the idea of the book club bringing you together. Your friendship from there can be whatever you want it to be. So
right,
we focus on letting people know, hey, there's some tough reading in here. There's some like depressing reading about the Holocaust and the rise of the Nazis is not fun reading.
right,
It's important. But we also want to make sure that people are like, after your book club or instead of a meeting about the book, go to the local bar. Like, go hang out at the coffee shop, because that socialization, that's where the trust building comes from. That's where you get to know people. And from those relationships, that's where you'll start to see leaders rise up. The person who's like, we're going to choose this coffee place, we're going to go this time, that is the first step towards leadership that could be
right.
a hyper local political
Just
movement.
making a decision, Chris. Just making a decision,
Yep.
right?
And it's okay to not want to be the person who makes the decisions, right? So
You know,
whether it's your part, that is your personality, or you just need a break. Like, it's okay to not be the decision maker and let somebody else take that role. But this book club is meant to facilitate exactly that.
it's really interesting that you talked about a third place because I've actually been thinking about that a lot just this week, which is um, MAGA, the hardcore part of the Republican Party has that third place, and it is
Hmm.
a church. It is the church, typically the evangelical church. They are in the same place every weekend building community. Now, like for you and me, we might think it is, and I think you could make an argument it is a toxic version of community, but they are there every weekend. They are there in fellowship. And I think in a prior time, and when I say prior time, Chris, this is probably 30 or 40 years ago, right? You talked about a union hall or a VFW hall, but it also could have been a union hall,
Hmm.
right? When organized labor was a pretty significant part of the economy and part of someone's personal and political life, right? That was where they found fellowship and they also got political communication very clearly. And so I think you're absolutely right, which is we have to recreate those third places. We have to find those places. And to your point, look, if at meeting number one we have 10 people, right? In two
Hmm.
weeks, what I want is this, right? I want 20 people. I want everybody here to bring one person. 2 weeks after that, I want everybody here to bring one more person. We've gone from 10 to 40. But here's what we've done too, Chris, is we've also started the flywheel, whereas those original 10 people met for the first time. They met for a second time, right? Now they're more closely aligned with one another. They understand each other. By the time they've met a third time, they're now friends. They
Yep.
understand what's going on. They're starting to ask about one another's lives. And I do believe that that in-person physical connection is important. I think it's almost like Velcro, right? It's like, there's that friction, right? It's
Hmm.
the hook and the loop or whatever, and people start to stick together. And what's happening is that now, okay, now the people in the second meeting and there's, in the third meeting, and what happened is now not only are you growing, but those people, as you said, now the leaders are starting to appear. Who are the shiny people, right? And we've all been to enough
Yep.
things, Chris, where like you like, wait a second, that's the person, right? That's the person. And to your point, if they have been proactively willing to say, let's go to Chris's coffee shop, let's meet here, 12 o'clock Friday, right? They've self identified. Let's go find more
Hmm.
of them. And they are out there because this is the one thing I found, Chris, and I'm sure even more on your end is so many people have felt so helpless for so long that when given the opportunity to do something that's not even overtly political, right? But it is civic in nature. They'll jump at it because they're like, I just don't want to do it. To your point, I don't want to sit in my house. I don't want to sit on my couch. I don't want to doom scroll anymore. And so I think the third place thing is a real opportunity and frankly a requirement to start to get a lot of those people, those millions of people, Chris, who stayed home last year, who are likely to stay home next year, right? If nothing changes, we got to get them out of their houses. We got to get them back in their communities. And guys, it could be a book club. Could be kid, right? But to your point, Chris, the most important parts of life are not only, not surprisingly, in your home and in your neighborhood, right? But also in your community, because those are the places where people make
Hmm.
decisions that will affect your daily lives. Hello?
Yeah. And formative experiences that I've had in my own life. In 2014, this was 7 years after I had gotten out of the military. I had gone through a long stretch of being in a really bad place with out of control post traumatic stress disorder. Thankfully, I had access to the VA, and the VA slowly helped me kind of put myself back together. And when I finally felt in 2014 like everything was, the pieces were starting to come together, Hurricane Sandy happened. And I used to work in a shop, uh, blue collar stuff, working with my hands in Oceanside in Long Island. We had 5 feet of salt water come through, and it destroyed everything that I had built over the course of a couple of years, and all of the tools that I used to build it. And my boss could no longer employ me. So that piece of stability, that job, was pulled out from underneath me, and it was incredibly isolating. It sucked. Thankfully, I qualified as a veteran for this thing called vocational rehabilitation, or voc rehab, and I was able to go to school, and the VA would help pay for it. And I went from, kind of a blue collar job where I'm in the shop, I'm not really talking to anybody. This was my transition out of the military. It took a very long time. Wasn't ready to be surrounded by people. To an uncomfortable. I don't know how many thousands of students there are at Nassau Community College, but it was more people than I had been around really ever.
Mhm.
Uh, and over the course of a single semester, I went from feeling without purpose to, frankly, being pretty shy and not looking to engage with anybody, to my peers physically pulling me off of the couch. Other veterans, other student veterans, physically pulling me off of the couch in the Veterans Center and telling me like, "Hey, dude, hang out with us. Let's go, get lunch." And that interaction led to me not just opening up and building new and real and important relationships, but by the end of that semester, I was elected as president of that student veterans organization, representing 300 student veterans. A year later, I had the confidence to apply to Columbia University, a school that was way beyond my wildest dreams.
Sure.
And I graduated from that university years later with honors. And that was all because of that third place, of that commonality. We were veterans, we were student veterans, right? We had that social lubricant.
Right.
This book club idea, right? And the projects that you're working on, of this joining together around a common idea, is all the social lubricant that people need to go from online to in the real world and making a change in their local neighborhoods.
Yeah, and again, I think this is one other thing too, is that we've seen so much of what the Republican administration has done vis-a-vis harming the least of us so far,
Mhm,
that guys, our friends and neighbors are going to need all the help they can get. Right? When you look at, was it last month, Chris, that the U.S. Department of Agriculture cut about, in total, about $1.5 billion in food aid to kids and school lunches, to local food pantries, and to local farms, right, to provide that food. Like, guys, that support has to come from somewhere. I mean, Chris,
mhm,
this is one thing that I just saw yesterday that's made a little bit of news. That there were some terrible tornadoes that ripped through the South last month, and in particular in Arkansas, it killed 3 people. The Trump administration and FEMA denied Sarah Huckabee Sanders' disaster declaration. Right
wow.
now, look, I worked at FEMA 20 plus years ago. I was in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina. Like, I've seen what happens when people have nothing left. And
Mhm,
I know, guys, that there's a lot of folks who are going to be like, they voted for this. You know, they knew what they were getting, et cetera, et cetera. And guys, I got to tell you, like, that's the wrong way to think about it. Like, these
yeah,
are people for whom, like, their lives have been irrevocably changed, right? And it will be months, more likely years, many years before they achieve some semblance of normalcy. And so when you see that, what I implore you to do is to listen to the better angels of our nature, not to fall into the trap that so many of our countrymen have, which is ha ha ha, right? That sort of Schadenfreude. Well,
mhm,
you knew what you were getting, because what good does that do? And frankly, Chris, you can't be a good citizen, you can't be a good neighbor if you look at someone and take pleasure in their misfortune, especially when they had nothing to do with it.
yeah.
If you voted for Donald Trump, it wasn't like you invited God to hit you with a tornado.
Yeah, I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that. Like, we as New Yorkers whose local economy and people's homes and businesses were absolutely devastated by Sandy, I remember the people that I served with who, when I went on Facebook, who were like saying that we deserved that because of gay marriage in New York. Like,
Right.
I distinctly remember friends of mine, people that I used to care about and still do, acting as if because I was a New Yorker and because Democrats were in control of local politics, that we somehow deserved this kind of suffering, and that built a tremendous amount of anger and resentment that may never go away. Um, but that type of expression of hatred towards our fellow Americans is, uh, if you've been on the receiving end of it, you would certainly know that it is not good for us. It is not good for the person dishing it out, because that those words will be remembered.
And remember too, there was there's Ken Burns did a series on Vietnam many years ago, and there's a gentleman from, I think he was a Marine from St. Louis, Missouri, Chris, and
Hmm.
the interviewer asked him how many people he killed in Vietnam, and he said he could remember killing one Vietnamese, and he said, but I killed, and then he goes through like every Asian epithet, right? And he said, I killed, I don't know how many of those, and he goes, and you see, that's how easy it is to take somebody from a subject to an object. And,
Hmm.
objectification is always a dark path and always leads to places where, if I see you not as human, but as someone who is lesser than or deserves what they got, again, especially through no fault of their own, right? Then it's very hard that once that humanity starts slipping away, it takes a long, long time to get it back.
It does. You're describing something that I went through. It is it. And I'm not just blaming the army or the culture of the army. I joined the
Right.
army. I was 16 when the towers fell in New York. Like, virtually every family and friend that I grew up with knew some. If they didn't lose someone, they knew someone who was lost, whether it was a
Right.
firefighter, a cop, or someone on Wall Street. So I know what it feels like to to have that hatred towards another type of person, towards another people, to otherize and to objectify people to a point where it becomes okay psychologically to harm them, and you have to be prepared to do that kind of damage as a soldier, as I was
Right.
in a war zone. But we shouldn't allow uh, agitators to, like the Charlie Kirks of the world, right? These far right propagandists, and Steve Bannon especially,
Sure.
to dehumanize other Americans to the point where people are, you know, uh, I mean, they did MAGA posts. These guys post videos all the time about how like they can't wait for the Civil War. Like I've been to a war zone. Trust me,
Right.
you do not want that at
Right.
all.
No, I know it's always fascinating to me is all the there was a I don't remember, it was one of the movies, like maybe it was even your movie, Chris, but
Hmm.
there was a gentleman, I think he was actually from Texas, and he's in his home and he's sitting at his dining room table and he's got like 90 guns laid out in
Yeah.
front of him, right? And I'm not a gun guy. But I know that one, I only have two hands, and two, I'm not in the matrix, right? So like at any given point, like there's only so much you can do here, right? And so to me, there's also that sort of fiction. But I do want to ask you, and I know we're coming up on our 30 minutes, because here's where I think we need to be able to bring understanding, empathy with a willingness to fight. So give
Hmm.
us a little bit of that, because that's what you talked about at the top, which is, Elon Musk said the weakness of humanity is empathy, which I think is BS, and only somebody who thinks that Friedrich Nietzsche is like the basis of all human thought like would come to that. I don't know. Did you ever see the movie A Fish Called Wanda?
I have not.
Okay, I'll send it to you. But there's a character by Kevin Kline named Otto who's a total goon, and like he is the spiritual grandfather of Elon Musk, right? He's a total idiot, has no conception of philosophy. But Chris, not to get too far off track, but give us a sense of how you can take empathy, and you can take belief, and you can meld that with a willingness to fight that doesn't descend into darkness.
Yeah. So the movie that you're talking about is Against All Enemies by Ken Harbaugh,
Right. Yes, our good
which
friend Ken
people,
Harbaugh. Yes.
yeah, which people can watch. It's on YouTube. The Midas Touch Network, sponsored it actually with my organization, Veterans Fighting Fascism, so that everyone can watch it for free in perpetuity. And you're talking about the leader of the Texas Three Percenters, who was thirsty for war against other Americans. And I think the way that I have learned how to channel, frankly, my anger, and my rage at dysfunction in politics and others causing harm to vulnerable communities, is I have figured out a way to take the same drive that sent me to Iraq, which was I wanted to go hurt the bad guys. I grew up in New York, and the skyline changed when I was 16, and that was
Right.
traumatizing and it was painful. Instead of channeling it towards hate and wanting to do harm to other people, I have focused my rage and my anger. These may not be considered positive emotions, but they are powerful and they are essential to life. And I have learned to channel them to a fight for justice. And I know that people feel like the justice system is broken, with Donald Trump getting away with everything, with him pardoning all of the insurrectionists. Yes, there are parts of justice that are broken. But the whole point of Task Force Butler Institute is to gather evidence so that we can hold people accountable for wrongdoing. Just because the federal government right now and the FBI, the Department of Justice, are led by sycophants who are corrupt as you can get, doesn't mean that that evidence is not going to be valuable 4 years from now. So, what I want for people to try to do, particularly if you've got the level of privilege that you and I do, right? We
Right.
are protected Americans. I can call the cops without being afraid of what they're going to do when they get here.
Right.
People like us who are in a position to help others find justice, you will find satisfaction that will help get you over the disappointments that we are seeing every day out of the White House, out of local politics, out of failures, in people's own families who've gone and sailed into MAGA land and aren't coming back. When you
Right.
help people at the local level, it will give you the confidence and the hope that you need to make it through the toughest times that we are suffering through together nationally.
All right. Well, listen, we want to thank everybody who's coming, but before we go, Chris, let's make sure that everybody knows where they can find you, where they can find information about Task Force Butler, where they can. I know you've got a new podcast, either podcast or podcast network. Tell
Yep.
us about that before you go, too.
Yeah, so thanks for I am the worst at pitching my stuff. So I appreciate the prompt. My new podcast is called the Find Out Podcast, and it is a group of people who met through White Dudes for Harris. We were having pretty good conversations on our own, and everyone came out of November basically saying we need a new Joe Rogan. I can tell you a lot of reasons why that is impossible,
Right.
but there is a desire for more content like this. We recognize that and we are joining together to do it. So if people go to findoutpodcast.substack.com or just look for the Find Out Podcast anywhere that they get their podcasts, Apple, Spotify, whatever, subscribe, download, like, share. If you enjoy it, share it with your friends. We are trying to turn this into a full time job for all of us. The response has been incredible. We have over 1,600 reviews on Apple Podcasts alone, which is tremendous. If people want to support my nonprofits, taskforcebutlerinstitute.org and veteransfightingfascism.org, and you can find me, Chris Goldsmith. It's spelled with a K, Kris. I'm easy to find anywhere you want to find me. So, Reed, thanks so much for having me today. It's awesome to see you, and we need to do this more often.
Absolutely. And guys, before I go, let me just make a couple of pitches of my own. So, guys, I'd love you to go to jointheunion.us. Same spiritual idea, taking it from a little bit of different version, which is Chris, and he's working on the veterans. We're working on folks who have been sort of disassociated from politics, from party politics and all that. So go to jointheunion.us. I hope also you'll check out my podcast, also called The Home Front, on Apple, Spotify, wherever you will. Also here on Substack, called The Home Front. Chris, as always, it is so good to see you. Thanks for doing this with me today.
Thank you, brother. Let's do it again.
All right, everybody else, stay safe out there and get involved. Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.